From Geppetto Studios in New Freedom, Pennsylvania, welcome to the Cosmic Geppetto Podcast, your home for inclusive, positive geek culture, where we talk about movies, comics, music, books, and whatever else we feel like. Please welcome your host,
an effortless cool,
Brad Mendenhall.
Hey kids, it is episode 286 of the Cosmic Geppetto Podcast. Jarf Harden returns for another Fix-It episode. Wow, we have not done one of those in years. We set our sights high. Today, the Marvel Cinematic Universe will be fixed. Let's get to it. Exciting because it's sort of bringing everything full circle as we're coming down to probably about the last 10 episodes of the Cosmic Geppetto Podcast. We go back to the first guest, isn't even the right term, the first co-host of the show, the first person I talked to when I decided to do the show. He is back, Jarf Harden. Jarf, how you doing?
I'm great. That's right. We're back together, fresh from our humiliating first round defeat in the Movies by Minute trivia contest.
It goes to show, oh boy, that one was tough. It goes to show where my strengths and weaknesses are in the world of movie trivia, because I am really good at, this is the director of that movie. This is the movie that Sean Connery won an Oscar for, stuff like that. I'm really good at that. But when it comes to the eagle-eyed minutia of movies, I'm not especially strong.
Yes, same. In movies or in real life.
Yeah, in real life, I'm better. In real life, honest to God, that's pretty much my job. It's just looking for little things that are wrong. But it was. And I remember there was a game show about the Harry Potter films. And I've read the books, I've watched the movies, my kids enjoy the movies, so I've watched the movies many times. And it'd be like, okay, there was a candle. How many rings were on the candle? It's like, what the hell are you talking? And the contestants were like, oh, well, it's 12. I was like, oh my God, these kids are so into it. I feel like I should be kicking sand in their faces.
But it was for a great cause. It supported the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. The fundraiser was successful, so despite our own defeat, it was a moral victory. Yes,
we helped put some good in the world, and we weren't going up against scrubs. I mean, everyone was really good. So we're bringing back something we haven't done in a while. Literally years. We're going to fix something. We found something in the world of pop culture. It's not necessarily bad, but we feel it could use a course readjustment, and we're going to make suggestions. Jarf, what are we fixing today?
We're fixing the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I mean, like you said, going back to our earliest conversations on this podcast, back when it was called Movies at Marvel. So we're going full circle, and I think it would be interesting to listen back to that first episode that I was on talking about Iron Man and the very different way that we thought about the MCU when it was just limitless possibility. And the idea that movies would come out that just by word of mouth I would decide, don't need to see it, was unfathomable to me. But here we are.
Back then, it was 2 movies a year. Quickly became 3 movies. And the amount of excitement that everyone had, and just the tier of of character Not in quality, but back then, when the Marvel Cinematic Universe began, it was Iron Man, Hulk, Captain America, Thor. Now, not all these characters had huge... They didn't have, like, for lack of a better term, the biggest Q rating. Not everybody off the street would know who Captain America or Thor was. But if you even had a passing familiarity with comic books, you knew who these characters were. They were A-list in that world. And now looking at it in the 2020s, where, you know, the next Marvel movie is going to feature Captain Marvel, who in the comics they're trying to push up to that A-list. Ms. Marvel, who's a great character, but you know, she's a relatively new character. That character's been around for maybe 10 years. And Monica Rambeau, who was always a favorite of mine, but she is a real indication how many times that character has changed names and changed power sets over the last 20 years, because she's always an afterthought. And the three of those characters leading a movie is pretty astounding, but I have not yet missed a movie in theaters. Every Marvel movie I have seen in theaters, but I'm not seeing them all opening weekend. And I'm not... It used to be I would see the movie in theaters opening weekend, and then there's a second run movie theater not too far from me, and I would see it a second time when it came to the cheap theater. Not doing that. And I have missed a lot of the Marvel TV shows. And if you had told me, you know, if you went back in time and told teenage me, it's like they're going to be Marvel TV shows that you're just going to skip, I would have found that very hard to believe. But that's sort of where I'm at. And I have Disney Plus. Literally, there's nothing keeping me from watching this other than I don't feel like hitting that button on the Roku.
So I want to flag something in this whole idea of first wave of Marvel was your A-listers, and now going into phase 5, we're doing movies featuring B-listers or lower. Now, I think that it's important to acknowledge that is coming from the perspective of us as a couple of middle-aged guys. So I think, especially with Captain Marvel and Ms. Marvel, whether they are B-list characters or A-list, it depends on how old you are. So if you were in your prime comic book buying age when the Captain Marvel solo comic premiered, she might be an A-lister to you. And same with Ms. Marvel. Yeah,
and I definitely don't want to make it sound like, and I'm not trying to say that disparagingly. And Marvel's different, where Marvel doesn't have quite the same trinity of characters that DC does. DC has Superman, Wonder Woman, and Batman. Those three characters are the undisputed champions of the most cultural awareness.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, true in the Silver Age, true in the modern age, true today. There never has been a character to kind of knock them off of Mount Rushmore.
When it comes to cultural awareness for Marvel, you have Spider-Man. I guess Hulk, a bit, because of the Bill Bixby show. But I don't know. When it comes to cultural awareness, is there a third character that is at this before the Marvel movies started happening that was the same thing?
They haven't been, and they're only starting to be part of the MCU. But I would say the third would be the X-Men as a whole, because of the 90s cartoon.
Yeah.
Because you got like 90s cartoon, and then like Bang Bang, the 2000s movies come out right after that.
Hey, hey, hey.
sort of alluded to it. Are there Marvel movies that you have not seen in the theaters? And keeping in mind that because of COVID, that sort of changed the rules a little bit.
There are Marvel movies that I have not seen, period.
Oh.
Or at least one, Eternals.
Yeah.
I think that might be the only one.
You are certainly not the only person who has said that. Eternals, it felt like the first Marvel movie that was just it was a bit of a swing and a miss. Financially, it didn't make huge money. Nobody was excited about it. You never see anybody. If you go online, if you go on to YouTube, it's pretty quick to find. Okay, well, there's a cool scene. All the cool clips from the movies. You know, the Captain America elevator fight from Winter Soldier, the Avengers Endgame where Cap says "Avengers Assemble." All those great scenes. So many great
She-Hulk twerking.
Yeah, there's just nothing like that from Eternals. Nothing like grabbed the fans' imaginations the same way. And it sort of hit me, and I actually looked in prep, which, honest folks, is something we do sometimes, for this discussion. I sort of looked it up, and they are being very coy about a second Eternals movie. And
oh, really?
Every now and then, someone from the first movie is like, "Oh yeah, there's going to be a sequel," and then that same person will be interviewed as like, "Well, nothing's really in."
Yeah, and I mean, there's some great cast members, and I've heard great things about the director's previous work, but it was a comic that I never cared about, and it's something like 2.5 hours long, which I am a fan of shorter movies. For me, 90 minutes is the sweet spot. So usually they're already starting longer than I would like. And so those were all the things that have made me say it's not for me. Like, I'll keep it in my Disney Plus queue, and sometimes I'll toy around with the idea of starting it, but it feels so daunting.
I wonder what's going to happen because it did have good cast members. It could be very easy to slide over one of those characters, like find the characters that do work, and all right, they'll be in Thunderbolts, Marvels, whatever. But it does feel like you would have to reintroduce them and find a different hook to make them interesting. What about the TV shows? Have you been keeping up on those?
Mostly, yes. I have not seen Secret Invasion yet.
I haven't with Secret Invasion. I don't know if I find... And Samuel L. Jackson's a great actor. For some reason, I didn't find him compelling as a lead. And I remember the Secret Invasion comics, and I skipped it. So there was like... And Emilia Clarke, who comes across... I don't think I've ever seen her in a movie. And I never watched more than like a little bit of Game of Thrones here or there, so I wasn't like invested in her. So it was just okay, and I just didn't find it compelling. I watched She-Hulk. I like She-Hulk, and I think there was definitely a place for it. I watched the first few episodes of Moon Knight, and I just didn't feel like I just never bothered catching up with it.
Okay, you're missing out. Moon Knight is excellent.
Maybe one day I left off at the second episode.
It's a little bit of a slow burn.
I mean, the easy answer, maybe the right answer, there's just a lot of Marvel, and then there's a lot of other companies trying to be Marvel. Is it just burnout?
Now, okay, so before we start to fix, if we're identifying the problem, I am okay with Marvel creating streaming series and movies that I'm not particularly interested in. I don't see that necessarily as a problem. especially as, like you're saying, they're creating more and more content. And if they are varying the content, it's just inevitable. There's going to be some things that it just doesn't land for me, period, or maybe just does not land for me at that particular time. So I don't feel like watching a spy Marvel show right now, which is what I imagine Secret Invasion is, because it's a Nick Fury show. I mean, I had a spy Marvel show, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., that I watched and loved for many seasons, and obviously it went in all kinds of directions that are not so much about spycraft, but it just, sometimes it's just a timing thing. So I want to kind of more focus on things in movies, whether it's our cup of tea or not, that really seem to be not working or holding the MCU back. What's the first thing that comes to your mind when you look for that type of problem?
There is a little bit of visual sameness, especially from some of the action stuff. And I think my favorite Marvel movie is Winter Soldier, and the action from that movie felt different than anything that had happened before it. And they have some really good directors, and I understand Marvel has a house style, but I feel like that house style is starting to cost them some interesting directors doing interesting work visually. And I think it was something that never bothered me, and it has started to. And probably my favorite Marvel show was WandaVision, and my least favorite part of WandaVision was when they had the big fight at the end with the two Visions fighting, and it just looked like so many other Marvel climaxes.
Right.
Like, what's the first thing that pops up into your mind? Or also, do you think I'm full of crap? Maybe start with that.
No. I support what you're saying, and mine is related to visuals too, but it's not about the staging and action choreography. It's about the visual effects. So, big picture, the biggest thing that we need to do is improve the conditions for VFX workers. And the union has already made a big step forward in this direction, because just recently, as we're recording this, Marvel Studios VFX workers voted unanimously to unionize with the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees. And that is the first time visual effects workers have unionized with IATSE. So this is like, Marvel's got its own in-house VFX workers, so it's just like a slice of the pie. But as something that can improve the product that Marvel makes, along with improving their jobs, huge win. And then also, that can pave the way for other VFX workers, because, the Flash movie looked terrible. This is a complaint that's, far beyond just MCU.
Yeah, it's we've become a little more aware of how overworked CGI houses and animation houses are, and they're just overloaded. I enjoyed. Did you see the second Spider-Verse movie?
I haven't seen that yet, but that is actually something that I'm dying to see. But I haven't seen just because, I'm in the middle of, several series, or I have another movie that I decide to watch because somebody's doing a one-off podcast episode about it. And so, instead of seeing the next Spider-Verse movie than I'm seeing I'll watch like a sword and sorcery movie from the 80s.
It's very good, and there was a lot of talk about how successful that movie was financially, not just creatively. And creatively, it was it was amazing. But part of why it was so financially successful is it had a comparatively low budget. It actually surprised me, and I'm looking up the budget as we speak. The budget was $100 million, and it made $689 million global box office. So it made a good chunk of money. But I was like, $100 million? And hey, folks, I know that's a lot of money, but for a Sony big budget movie, that's not a lot of money. I was like, oh, that's somebody didn't. A lot of animators who put in a lot of hours did not get paid, if that's the budget for that movie. Same with the Mario Brothers movie that made over $1 billion and had a similar budget. It's like, wow, that's really sort of scary, because it was and I watched Mario Brothers because my kids were excited to watch it. It was completely fine. It was definitely a movie that, had a couple of winks to the adults, but not a lot. But just looking at that, like, when I see that, I just think, it's like, wow, a bunch of people did not get paid a proper living wage if they made that movie for that amount of money.
I heard a great episode of Today Explained, which is a Vox podcast, and the title is Why Do Marvel Movies Look So Bad? And they were talking about some of these working conditions, like you said, VFX workers being overworked. And so obviously union organizing is the best way to address that. But another thing they proposed, which I found interesting, was bringing in producers who are more experienced with working with digital effects, because they were drawing a contrast between the Little Mermaid and the latest Avatar movie, and like the quality of visual effects. And a lot of people called the Little Mermaid's visual effects flat and uninspired, and rave reviews for Avatar, and kind of like, what is the difference? One, there's not this huge push for the deadline where like a movie has got to come out by a specific date, and then they just end up rushing the visual effects. Whereas James Cameron, he has the luxury of saying, I'm going to spend as long as it takes on this movie until I get it right. Then also, he is one of the most experienced directors working with visual effects. So, it's great to bring in directors who bring a fresh voice to Marvel, but then it would be really helpful if there's someone in a producer role that is experienced and is going to know how long things are going to take. So if they are, because Marvel is, a lot of things are getting delayed now because of COVID and kind of like a trickle effect from that. But there's still going to ultimately be some deadline that they're rushing towards. So I think that kind of behind the scenes direction would be really helpful. So, you get a better product.
Well, another thing, and it's funny because it's almost a little bit counterintuitive to what I just said, where a lot of the people working in the effects houses are getting underpaid. Also, conversely, a lot of these budgets are too big. The last Fast and Furious movie lost money. It made $700 million worldwide. Yeah, it made $714 million worldwide and lost money because the budget for it was $340 million. The budget for that movie was so staggeringly big that it would need to make I'm sure someone will pick apart my math or will find something where, it did make money based on this, or it didn't lose as much as I'm thinking. But it basically, when a movie is that big a budget, it needs to make like $1 million to break even or to make a significant profit. I think back to the first Deadpool movie, which was made for a comparatively small budget because Ryan Reynolds was not at a career peak. Deadpool was not considered to be a prime candidate for a solo film based on not having the best cultural awareness, the poor reception of the Wolverine Origins movie. So they ended up giving it like a budget of $60 million. Because it had that small budget, because it didn't need to have as high a rate of return, they could have an R-rated movie that was... And we all forget how different the first Deadpool movie was. It was a lot of profanity, a lot of
humor.
Yeah, and it certainly wasn't a perfect movie, but it was a movie they couldn't have made if it had a $200 million budget. I would like to see what could happen. Let's get a really good director with an interesting visual style. Let's get a daring script. And it's like, okay, this is gonna be a cheaper movie, and we're gonna do something cool. We're gonna be a little more creative with the effects. We're not gonna need to make $500 million to even get close to breaking even. Some of the things that I've liked most from Marvel over the last few years have been sort of the under the radar stuff. I really liked Werewolf by Night.
Yeah, that's on my top 5 from Phase 4 list. That was cool.
It was very cool. It's small budget, low expectation. They just wanted people to watch it and enjoy it, and I really did. And it was black and white, leaning into the horror aspect with some great dark humor, almost like Tales from the Crypt style humor. I was like, okay, this is awesome. And they didn't have to worry about making everyone happy. Another thing that I loved, this is probably my favorite Marvel thing over the last 2 or 3 years, that I don't think that a lot of people aren't paying attention to, is the excellent Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur TV show. Have you had a chance to check this out?
I've checked out a little. I love that comic.
The music is amazing. This really cool kinetic visual style. Like great music, great art. It's a show that my daughter loves seeing a young girl as the protagonist, and it's so well done, so well written. And it's a little bit under the radar because, and I would hate to think of if they tried to start with a Moon Girl movie, a live action Moon Girl movie, what they would have to do to make everyone happy.
Yeah, I don't want to see her hanging out with a big CGI dinosaur. So that, what you're saying about smaller budget, R rating, daring choices, it kind of leads into my next point, which is dial up the romance. The MCU is pretty notoriously sexless, and I think it's time to let our heroes be horny. And my number one from Phase 4 that is heading in the right direction with this is She-Hulk. She smashes the fourth wall, and sometimes Matt Murdock. Like, that's the energy that I think we need in this next phase.
We're not the first people to point this out. Just in entertainment, in general, there's been a loss of romance, sexiness, whatever, which is why when every now and then a movie does lean into that a little bit, despite the fact that the 50 Shades of Grey movies were terrible, people came out for them because it was the first time in a while that there was sexiness in movies. Again, it was really crappily done, and also gave a really bad message about a world that the people who were involved in this creation did not understand.
Right. Yeah. So like healthy, sex positive horniness, to be more clear. And I think that She-Hulk had all of that. You know, she had her, and it was like sexiness, warts and all. So, you know, she's going on all of these terrible Tinder dates. And then the guys only dig her when she's She-Hulk. And, you know.
Because, God, who would be into Tatiana Maslany?
Right.
Oh, she's only one of the most beautiful creatures on the planet the rest of the time, but
I like the way that she talked about her hookup with Matt Murdock, and you know, she said that, "Oh, I thought the episode was over. I thought we brought it to a satisfying climax, and believe me, we did." Something along those lines. You know, those like winking, but like also centering a woman's pleasure. Like, all of that is what we need more of.
It felt like they had a little bit of that at the beginning where, and you know, Tony Stark in the first Iron Man movie, he was a cad.
Mm-hmm.
But he was also, you know, he was a pleasure-seeking individual. And even in the first Incredible Hulk movie, there was not a lot, but they at least addressed sex a little bit. They also didn't ignore the fact that Edward Norton is a good-looking guy with a ton of with charisma. They had there was the absolutely gorgeous coworker of Bruce Banner at the bottling company, who was making eyes at him the entire time, and there was a neat little bit of flirtiness there. And it just got less and less the times where and it feels tacked on when they've done it. They tried to have a little bit of, you know, addressing the fact that Chris Hemsworth is a great looking guy in Love and Thunder, but it felt tacked on.
So I think let the heroes be horny and explore that as a motivation for things they do, because that's a relatable thing. Like, that is something that humanizes them. None of us have a magic space hammer that we can fly around with, but, you know, we can relate to like a relationship brewing and attraction and all of that. So it just brings the Marvel characters back to that, like, you're empathizing with them. Like, why do we love Spider-Man? Because like he's an everyman and feels a little bit nerdy, and you know, he's trying to balance his home life and work and being Spider-Man. And so, you know, I think it's just a part of the core of characters that's kind of missing from the Marvel movies.
I mean, aside from She-Hulk, which has sort of been established, do you see any characters where you think they could lean into that? I like the Shang-Chi movie, but they really steered away from any sort of romantic interest in that film. Which, you have there's a great looking actor with, and it's like, you're not going to try to give him an interest. Marvel's, have not yet done anything trying to even address a romantic interest for Carol Danvers, which is interesting because in the comics she's had a lot of romantic interest from everyone from Falcon to Wonder Man to even like flirting with Spider-Man. Is there a character you think that could really do something cool with other than She-Hulk?
Well, to address the characters that you brought up, I kind of am okay with Carol Danvers' stories focusing on other aspects of her life than her romantic life. I feel like there's just so many ways they could do that wrong in a movie that they might be better focusing on her friendship with her fellow Marvels, that, and like friendships with women. I see such an important character in that regard. You just kind of have a sense that they're going to F it up if they, introduce some dude that she's hot for. However, the character that they keep teasing us about is Valkyrie. And, in the press leading up to Thor: Love and Thunder, Tessa Thompson said, what's the first thing that she is going to do, now that she is the head of Asgard? She's got to find herself a queen. It didn't happen. Now there was, there were sad flashbacks for someone who was her girlfriend and, spoiler alert, died many, many years ago. And, now she is carrying all of that guilt and sorrow. That's, just to be clear, when I said I wanted Valkyrie to have a girlfriend, that's not what I meant. I meant like a romance and dating and together and fun and sexy. And
because Tessa Thompson's one of the sexiest people on the planet.
Yeah, she's got chemistry with everyone. So let her use it.
ELA.
How about you? Marvel matchmaking.
There's a Blade movie coming out. It's on the board, and I think you could have something really cool with a Blade film. I think that is Mahershala Ali is a.
I think it's Mahershala.
I think you're right, Mahershala. I just bad with names, but Mahershala Ali is an amazingly has such fantastic gravitas and great looking guy with a charisma for days. And I think, having Blade, if you could lean into the blaxploitation, which Blade has dabbled with in other films and in the comics, and lean into that charisma and the brooding hero. And I think you could give him. I think you could find a bunch of actors who he could have chemistry with, and I think it would be really amazing. I think it's very telling that one of the best sexy stars that you've had was in the Netflix Marvel shows, Matt Murdock, and of course Luke Cage, who, they couldn't wait to hook him up with basically every female character in that little Netflix universe because he looked really good with all of them.
Right.
And I think you could do that in a cinematic level with Mahershala Ali. So I think Blade, you could do something really cool in that regard.
What do you mean when you say lean into the blaxploitation angle of the character?
Blade has roots in that supernatural blaxploitation era, 70s era, and a lot of that if you watch an old Shaft movie, it was all about him beating people up and then hooking up with a woman and then rinse and repeat. Now it was really misogynistic. The Shaft films have not aged well, but modernize it where it's like lean into this, like there was a sexiness to those movies and a grittiness and really surviving on the presence of these amazing these performers who honestly not all of them were great actors, but they all just had an effortless cool. And you were like, you're all about it. It's like, yeah, I'm worried. It'd be cool to see all these really sexy people, and they all like with great costumes and great swagger. It's like, yeah, of course you want to see them hook up. And I think you could lean into that. I think you could do the same thing with a Blade movie.
I can see it with Mahershala. I think the character is tough, at least the way that Wesley Snipes portrayed him, because a big part of it is that he is so restrained. I mean, maybe that is where you get the tension, but I could never imagine him as like a Pierce Brosnan James Bond, where he's like smooth and cool and yes, like everyone wants to have sex with me. I am confident in every situation. Like he is, has this haunted quality to him, and it's all about like holding back his bloodlust. And in the Wesley Snipes movies, you would have these really intense scenes where he's getting the treatment that like holds back his thirst, and it like is racking his body violently. And so that, none of that is really sexy because it's like about him being restrained. Now, I don't know how they're going to approach it in the modern iteration, but that's kind of the challenge that I see with that character.
It can be done. Vampire stuff has historically been it's been the sexy horror genre.
Mm-hmm.
You and I, when we were in our 20s, it was Buffy, where you had, they had David Boreanaz and Spike, who were charismatic guys who were brooding, and you gave them they had great costumes and cool outfits, and they got to be sexy characters.
And don't forget about Drusilla, man. Spike and Drusilla.
Oh yeah.
That's a sexy couple for the ages.
So much to the point where, for a lot of people, Spike falling in love with Buffy didn't work because it's like, what about Drusilla?
Yeah.
Like, we like those two characters together so much.
Yeah, and maybe that's where you amp up the sexiness in a Blade movie, because it's like other vampire characters that you introduce in contrast to Blade ones that fully embrace being vampires and are kind of throwing it in his face.
It feels like that's the natural place. It needs to be done with the movies. I feel that's where the big swing is when it comes to that. Well, it was interesting because with some of the shows, She-Hulk had a little bit of a, you've already called out, She-Hulk had a bit of that. I have been assured by Dr. Anna Papard that in WandaVision, Vision was very sexy.
Nice.
Dr. Anna is waiting for is she just wants a sexy Nightcrawler in her movies. They're bringing Deadpool into the Marvel Universe, especially in the first Deadpool movie. He was portrayed as, that was a horny movie, especially the first half hour.
Yeah. And I mean, it was like silly horny, but it was still horny.
Yeah. Which was one of, it hurt so bad when they fridged Vanessa in the second movie.
Yeah.
What else do you think the Marvel movies need?
My third and final note is don't force everything to build towards a future crossover. Everything
with Marvel, and it's them trying to repeat what worked, where you had the first three or however many phases, it was getting to Thanos, and now the new Thanos is Kang. But I mean, do you think they need to completely get away with that, or is it just have that in the background and you don't need him in every movie, or should they just get away from it and just make good movies?
I think they should just make good movies. I mean, there's so many complicated things to unpack. I think the actor's name is Jonathan Majors, right, who plays Kang, and so he's got a really problematic personal history of late, and I think it was assault charges, and so I mean that has probably cooled their interest. And then even before I knew that, I mean, Ant-Man Quantumania is like the lowest on my list for Marvel movies and streaming series. And I just did not relate to him as a villain because I didn't really understand what his motivations were. So I don't think that is a good start for centering a bunch of movies around him. Plus the multiverse it's kind of a tricky concept because it can go in unlimited directions, and it kind of works for a series like What If, where all you have to do is just have a little romp in one alternate dimension. And it can be really cool in standalone comics too. But I think building towards a big cinematic event that's about multiverses, I mean, I can't, it makes my head swim imagining the overblown CGI laden finale that would require. So yeah, I mean, I think maybe pump the brakes on that, but I'm really looking at it from the larger point to, you need to make sure that the individual shows and individual movies are compelling themselves and not focus so much attention on, okay, now in episode 2, we're going to introduce this character because they're going to spin off into their other show. Because then sometimes those shows don't even happen. I just read that, unfortunately, Ironheart has been removed from the schedule. So who knows if we'll ever get that Ironheart series. And it now feels even more extraneous that she was introduced in Black Panther Wakanda Forever, because, there were too many characters going on to give any one or more of them enough screen time and attention, and kind of storylines pulled in too many directions. So yeah, I think that you just kind of focus on the story that you're telling. And then the things that you do to tease future projects, just relegate them to like a much smaller part, like they would do with just an after credit scene. I'm not saying don't do it. Obviously they want to, and they're, trying to cross promote. Like, yes, do that, but just don't make the cross promotion an integral part of your story in a way that takes away from the story.
And you're right. With Thanos, he popped up in the first Avengers film at the end credits. Awesome. And he had a minute-long bit in minute and a half of screen time in the first Guardians movie. There was so little of him until you got to Infinity War. We've already seen Kang lose twice. He died at the end of this first season of Loki, and he loses in Ant-Man Quantumanium. We've already seen a lot of him.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, it's each time you have that, each time where he gets outsmarted or out whatever, it makes like there being a big showdown in an Avengers film not as compelling. I don't know. It's tough. And then there's Jonathan Majors. For a while looked like he was going to be a huge new star. Between I thought he was great in Loki. And then he was fantastic in there was a Western on Netflix, The Harder They Fall, with him and Idris Elba. And then he was really good in the second Creed film.
Third, yeah. Creed 3, yeah.
It just shows the danger of investing in having so much invested in actors, but that's the world of Marvel, because they signed these actors to really long contracts and they focus so much around them. I tend to agree. I don't think Kang. They've given Kang 3-4 times as much, even more than that, as much screen time as they've given Thanos at the same point, and I think it's diminished returns. Look over on the other side. Over in DC, they're doing a lot of shifting around, and it looks like it's sort of a soft reboot. You already mentioned The Flash, which, The Flash happened.
Right.
What do you think is going to happen there? Do you think, because it feels like DC has been trying to do Marvel stuff and not with a lot of success. Do you think they're going to go in that direction? Do you think they're going to, with James Gunn co-leading things over there, do you think they're going to be able to sort of get in the right direction? Because I have thoughts, but I want to hear yours first.
Honestly, I don't really know. I like some of James Gunn's work, and some of it, I don't especially care for. I think that he is at his best when he is kind of tempered by somebody else. And so I'm very curious to see what he does as an overall lead for a universe, rather than someone who is putting his own personal stamp on something like Guardians of the Galaxy, which, it definitely was a comic, but there was so much that you could do with it, because it was okay, it's an IP, but it does not really have a diehard fan base. So I'm going to use this to tell a story about trauma and grief and found family. And he, and I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of the woman that he worked with that was a co-writer on that, but you just can kind of tell a difference between that and the Suicide Squad, where it was just like him going on a complete romp of his like sort of Traumaville style married with a superhero movie, and it just didn't have as much heart. It was still an enjoyable movie, but it's not the kind that I would return to again and again like I do the Guardians movies. So yeah, so it's kind of, you know, he can be a little bit erratic like that to me. So I'm very curious to see, you know, it's a much bigger job to steer a whole universe.
Yeah, I agree. I really liked the Suicide Squad, but it was obviously done without restraints, and there were a couple times like, you know what, wouldn't have hurt him having a little bit oversight or someone pulling him back just a little bit. My thing is, I think he works so much better. Have him work in the corner of a universe, of a franchise, where I wouldn't have been interested to see what Guardians of the Galaxy were the type of characters I wanted to see him work with. I would have loved to see him work with maybe Blade or Ghost Rider or even Doctor Strange. I didn't want to see James Gunn's take on Captain America, Spider-Man. I don't think that fits the way he works. And when they announced that James Gunn's going to direct a Superman movie, I was like, I don't want to see that. I don't think he's a good fit for a Superman. I don't think a Superman's a good fit for him. That isn't to say it'll be a bad movie, but I don't think it leans into his strengths as a director. We'll see what happens, but I think he is a very subversive director. As you called out, he came from Trauma World. There's some weird, neat, dark edges in the Guardians movies. Especially you saw it in the third one. The third Guardians movie was really dark in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
I think he's great. If you say, okay, here's Suicide Squad, here's The Outsiders, here's Challengers of the Unknown, these lesser DC properties where you can really go crazy with it and leave him alone and see what he comes up with, rather than here's Superman, Batman.
Lobo.
Oh, God, Lobo. He would do amazing, horrifying stuff with Lobo. And I don't really care for Lobo, but I think he's the sort of character that would just be wonderfully unhinged. He did great stuff. I really liked the Peacemaker show, although it was completely unhinged. It did make you grimace a little bit. It's like, wow, that's painful to watch. Jarf, this has been amazing. I really appreciate you taking the time. I think we fixed it.
We did it. You're welcome.
Make the movie, maybe a few less movies. Make them in 90 minutes and make them horny. What more do you need?
Yeah. Stop trying to make Kang happen.
Jarf, plug your pluggables. I know you got a very cool show out right now, and you need to tell our audience about it.
I do, and I will. But I have a recommendation first, something that I'm watching right now. The documentary Kelsey on Amazon Prime. It's mainly about Eagles center Jason Kelsey, but also his family, his brother Travis Kelsey, who is, one of the most trending topics in the NFL because of the Taylor Swift of it all. By the way, speaking of Taylor Swift, great episode with Sarah on Taylor Swift and Fall Out Boy and Marshall Crenshaw et al. I really enjoyed that. So, but, going back to the Kelsey documentary, it's NFL Films. I became aware of it because an old friend, Demian, was an editor on it. It is really fun. You get kind of this insider look into the NFL, and then his family. Personally, it was made at the time where he was deciding whether last year was going to be his final year in the NFL, at the same time as he and his wife were expecting I think it's their third child. And then, of course, the Eagles ended up going to the Super Bowl up against his brother and Kansas City. So, like unexpected drama coming from the situation, but you just really see how much heart he has as a player, and it's really excellent. So, Kelsey on Amazon Prime, 100% recommend. Did you want to react to that, or should I go right into?
Oh yeah, well the Kelsey brothers, it's like if you took a golden retriever and turned it into a pair of brothers and then had them play football. They are so likable, goofy.
They have a hit podcast,
and it is insane. Travis and his, like you said, the Taylor Swift of it all. Actually, just last night, and this is the weirdest thing. My daughter London is a massive Saturday Night Live fan. We have Peacock, where they have all the old, starting from episode 1. They have all the Saturday Night Lives, and she started watching it because Jenna Ortega, who my daughter loves.
Yeah, Wednesday in the house.
Oh yeah, and London watched that, and it's like, well, what else is there? So, and then I have to be very careful because the content of SNL is adult skewing.
Yes.
Most of that goes over her head. But we just watched the episode that Travis Kelce hosted yesterday.
Oh, cool.
Both Kelce brothers were on there. They joked a lot about the results of that particular Super Bowl, which Jarf and I are Philadelphia sports fans. That Super Bowl hurt us.
Yep.
That was a weird year last year, that season, between the Phillies going to the World Series and the Eagles going to the Super Bowl, and just a lot of disappointment all around with the results of those two games.
But it's a brand new year now. As of last night, the Phillies just clinched a postseason berth with a walk-off win. So, yeah, and the Eagles are 3-0. So, last year was amazing despite those disappointments, and I'm feeling good again.
Yeah, it's not a terrible time to be a Philadelphia sports fan.
Especially if you compare it to the history of Philadelphia sports fans over time.
Oh, yeah. It's
a lot of losing.
That's a lot of losing. Yeah. The Phillies were such a bad baseball team for so long. The Eagles were a pretty good football team for so long, but at the same time that the Dallas Cowboys were amazing. So it was a lot of congratulations on getting to the first round of the playoffs and have a nice offseason. All right, but Kelsey documentary on Amazon Prime. Definitely we'll have to check that out. Do you have anything else to recommend, or are you going to plug your pluggables?
I am going to both recommend and plug my new podcast, Don't Feed the Plants, which is a limited series on the movie musical Little Shop of Horrors. I'm doing one episode for every song in the movie, and I've just brought some really cool guests. Friend of the show, Mav, was on for an episode. That's the episode as we're recording this. It's coming out on Friday. And it's weekly. I brought in some media studies professors, some performers from Little Shop on Broadway, puppeteers, other fans, even got a horticulturalist from the local arboretum that happens to be a big Little Shop of Horrors fan. So people with a lot of interesting perspectives, and we're just taking it one song at a time, talking about the themes of the movie and other social issues that it gets into. And it's just been a lot of fun. I'm finding people have a lot of nostalgia and love for this movie, just a wacky mix of horror and puppets and musical satire, fantastic cast, great comedic cast, and definitely encourage folks to check that out. Again, it's called Don't Feed the Plants.
So a weird little bit of timely stuff. Now, have you finished recording? Is it all in the can?
I have one episode left to record.
Because that's been in the news because of Miriam Margolis accusing Steve Martin of being, what was the term she used? Unlovely and unapologetic on the set of that film.
Yes, I did read that.
Did you have chance to address that? Because it was part of one of the songs. I didn't know if how the timing worked out on that.
No, my wife just sent me that article this weekend. I haven't recorded anything since, and I recorded so she's in the scene with Steve Martin for the song Dentist. I recorded that a long time ago.
Which was brilliant. That was so good.
It's really, really good. To be honest, it sounds like a shitty situation. Sorry for the language. But I think that the headlines for it make it sound like it was something a lot worse than what it really was. So the way she described it, he was doing a fake punch because, he's like this abusive dentist. And so in addition to torturing his patients, he also punches his coworkers. And so when staging this fake punch, she says that he really hit her. And when I read the headline, I thought like, oh my God, he sexually assaulted somebody on the set of Little Shop. That's horrible. And so it's nothing like that. It's something that's really crappy. Obviously, you don't want it to happen. And she said that she, at the end of working, had a headache. And so, it's a crappy thing, but honestly, it's not that bad. The only thing that bugged me about the situation was the way Steve Martin responded, because he was completely dismissive. And he said, I'm always very professional when I stage my physical comedy. And considering the fact that he is someone who has so much more power than this actor who I honestly had to look up and like, wait, she was in Little Shop? Oh yeah, right. She's the dental assistant. And then also she's in the Harry Potter movies, which you mentioned earlier. I'm not really a fan. So I think that he should have just said like, I'm so sorry that happened. That's something that like I never want to happen, because, all she said that he did was really punch her when he was meaning to just fake punch her. Like that kind of thing could happen, right? And it's a movie that he made 35 years ago. So he can't admit that he made a mistake 35 years ago. That's the part that bugs me.
Yeah, it would have done, he would have done a lot for himself, where if just saying, and you can even, I don't know. There are people whose jobs it is to walk people through these sort of things. It was pretty shocking. He has a really good reputation. You and I have both been on sets, and I have seen actors, directors, in the heat of the moment, or for some sort of desire to get too physical. I once had a director just beat the tar out of me. I was in a show called Incident at Vichy, which is based on an Arthur Miller play about the Nazi occupation of Vichy, France. And my character was roughed up by a German guard. And the director wasn't happy with how the German guard was grabbing me. And she was a 5'4" woman, probably about 30 years older than me. She's like, no, this is what you gotta do. And she grabs me and she starts yelling Jewish slurs at me, bouncing me around, ripped my shirt and threw me down. I was like, that woman just kicked my ass.
Well, that play sounds like a lot of fun. And we're definitely steering this episode towards like a nice upbeat conclusion. Good job.
Again, where can people check out this program? I'm sure it's on all podcatchers. Do you have any social media that they should be following?
Yes, you can follow it on Instagram and TikTok at Don't Feed Plants.
We recommend everyone do that. I listened to the first episode. As always, it's excellent.
Oh, thanks, man.
Recommend everyone do so. Jarf, you get the final word.
Well, folks, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. What could be a bigger topic and what could be a more fitting topic for us to address? And yes, we fixed it for you, so you're welcome. Now, we only touched on DC rather briefly, so probably there's a little bit more that could be fixed there, and I'm sure there will be future franchises for us to fix. But until then, we'll see you in the funny pages.
That wraps episode 286. Obviously, I have to give big thanks to Jarf Hardin. He was the first voice, other than mine, heard on this program. He has given so much creatively, and more important, is the conscience of the Cosmic Geppetto podcast. Our friendship is over 30 years old. Jeez, I say that, and I feel very, very tired. Anywho, that is a long-winded way of saying he is one of my dearest friends, and I love him. Next time on the Cosmic Geppetto podcast, author and podcaster Tierney Steele is back to talk about biopics and, quite frankly, anything else we can think of. Until then, as Jarf already said,
see you in the funny pages.
Subscribe to the Cosmic Geppetto podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever quality podcasts can be found. Rate and review us while there. Follow us on Twitter at CosmicGPod, and we will follow you back. Unless you're a jerk. We don't follow jerks. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cosmic Geppetto. We love hearing your ideas for upcoming episodes. Email us at CosmicGeppetto@Comcast.net.
It's time to let our heroes be horny.